Hello, everyone, and welcome to Monday Night Travel with Rick Steves Europe. My name is Gabe Gunning, and I have the privilege of serving as your moderator this evening as we welcome Rick back to Monday Night Travel for the first time since March to hear about his recent research and timely takeaways from Portugal and Germany. Now, without further ado, I am going to turn things over to our host for this evening, Rick Steves. Rick, over to you.
Hey, Gabe, thanks for the nice introduction, and thanks to everybody for joining us tonight. I'm just so thankful for Monday Night Travel. We all have a place to go when we want to scratch our travel bug bites. And I'm just back from a month in Portugal and Germany. I had an amazing time, and I was just there a week ago, and I'm excited to share with you what I learned. So thank you so much for tuning in. We're going to be starting out in Portugal, and so I'm just going to start out with a little bit of port wine here. And I've got my nice 10-year tawny port from the Taylor Company, and you'll see that when you're in Porto. And it feels good to know how the culture contributes to the various wines and cuisine and so on. And when you enjoy port, you're enjoying a fortified wine, and it can only be called port if it's from Portugal. And it's fortified usually with a little bit of brandy, and that helps it ferment in a different way. It makes it sweeter. It makes it kind of, because it's tawny, I mentioned it's been in a barrel for 10 years. That means it's been aging in wood, so it picks up a woody flavor, kind of a nutty flavor, and it gets a beautiful golden color. So I'm going to be sipping that as we go to Portugal. I want to remind you that every month or every week we get to take you somewhere on Monday Night Travel, and I'm just so eager to get right into it here. So I think what I'm going to do is take you right into my slideshow, and then we'll go for about half an hour in Portugal, and then we'll go for half an hour in Germany, and then I can hardly wait to answer some of your questions. But each time I fly away, I've got sort of a tradition of taking a photograph of me packing light on my deck, and it's a fun tradition. I'm all amped up with the guidebook that I'm going to be working on, and packing light. Always carry on my bag, 9 by 22 by 14 inches in that bag. Whether I'm going for 2 weeks or 2 months, it's exactly the same. And I got my little day bag with me. And oh man, I had a good trip. So flew right, I went, what did I do? I went through Frankfurt, I believe, to get to Lisbon. And then right away, I'm just in the heart of things there. Lisbon's just a beautiful place to go. And I was there in a good time of year. I was there, started out my trip in late May. And it's a delightful time to be in Portugal. The jacaranda trees are out, beautiful flowers, kind of complementing the beautiful blue tiles that you see in all of the historic buildings. And there's just an energy that I wanted to capture when I was traveling through Portugal and through Germany. There's a real energy on the streets. And how does that translate into tourism? How does that impact our travels? What kind of crowds does that result in, and so on? That was my goal. So I had a great time. Happened to be landing just in time for St. Anthony's Day. And yeah, I guess now that was like June 13th every year is St. Anthony Day. And my goodness, the city was all dolled up, and music everywhere you look. And the Alfama is the old Visigothic birthplace of Lisbon, the old-fashioned sailors' quarter. And of course, that was just festooned. And everywhere you went in Lisbon on St. Anthony's Day, you had parties in the street. And it was just a wonderful introduction to Europe. And my friends were saying, the great thing about St. Anthony's Day is the smell of sardines being grilled. And what's the smell of Lisbon? Well, it's sardines being grilled, and I enjoyed a lot of plates just like this, getting into it, eating local, learning from my friends how to eat properly a sardine when you're in Lisbon. When I'm researching my guidebooks, I love to bump into other travelers and constantly meeting people with our books. Here's a couple that was in one of the epic sort of classic cafes. They've got their chapter ripped out like good travelers, so they're packing light. And I was here in La Brasiera Cafe, and this in the past you could eat at the bar and have a little bica, a little cup of espresso for about $1. And now they don't let you do that anymore. They're getting a little bit greedy. And that's an example of something I have to be up to date with in my book. So now if you go there, you're going to have to sit down at a table instead of at a bar. These are the practical things that we do when we update a guidebook. And I'm sort of in a great mood right now because I just had 28 straight days of guidebook research. And occasionally I'd end up looking through the windows of a locked up restaurant that I wanted to see, but generally I had my guides navigating me around. Every day I had two guides, one at 10 and one at 6, one for the sightseeing and one for the restaurants. This would have been Ricardo from a local company called Taste Porto, and he works in the city of Porto. This was Sima up in Germany from Dresden. Her little company is called See My Dresden. I just love working with these small independent business people, and they just are a huge help. I've got a very tightly organized itinerary when I'm going over there. Every day is important for the research work. Here you can see each day I would have a guide, as I mentioned, one guide at 10 o'clock, G10, and then a guide at 6 o'clock, G6, G10, G6, G10, G6, and then input, fly to the next destination or catch the train. Filling up those little black books. And each day, my challenge is to organize my time smartly. Here you can see the little ripped up piece of paper. I rip papers into a third so they fit into my guidebook nicely because I'm on the streets just with the guidebook and a pencil, this little piece of paper, and my Moleskine black notebook. But you can see each day I've got my guides, I've got my checklist of things to do. If I'm doing restaurants, for instance, this evening I was meeting with Jim, and here's my list of things to review with him. And then these are the restaurants we're going to see in that order as I can update the book. But it's just so much fun to be collaborating with all of these passionate guides. They know their sites really well. They love their cities. They love their culture. And they love the thought that they can help take a Rick Steves guidebook like this and work with me as this is just a typical page in the book, as I update things. And each night, I got to have a couple hours of energy left over by the time I get back to my room so I can try to understand what all that scribble means. I can read my writing for 24 hours after I write it, but after that I look at it and I go, what was that? But if I'm diligent about inputting, it'll work just fine. So right now this is the funny thing, I've been home for a week and I'm just spending every day finalizing all the chapters that are up to date and getting into my local editor here. All sorts of interesting challenges when you're researching a guidebook. If you've got the best-selling guidebook to a certain city, you can bet there's a lot of people that want to say they're recommended by you, and not all of them are. And I get to go there and kind of see what's the action that way. Rick Steves recommended this store. Is that right? Okay, we'll check that out. Another thing I get to do is update the app, my Rick Steves Auto Europe app. And just occurred to me there, my beard is just almost nothing. So we're going to be able to track these pictures by where's my beard. It's 28 days of growth. So if you see me with a big beard in the middle of a shot with no beards, that's slipped in from later on the trip. Boy, there's stuff going on. Europe is investing in its infrastructure, and there's new opportunities for travelers. Anytime you have an industrial port, it's going to be evolving from a Rust Belt derelict industrial zone where nobody wanted to go to a very trendy place, which is young and vibrant and kind of edgy. Here in Lisbon, the harborfront now is cleaned up for people to stroll. And every evening, this is the passeggiata. This is where people do their laps. Also, Europe is investing in its infrastructure. They're just tunneling everywhere. A humble country like Portugal, they've got an amazing subway system. It is slick, it is clean, it is fast, it is frequent, it is punctual, it is cheap. Or, if you're a romantic, you can ride the trolley. I love riding the trolley in Lisbon, but so do all the other tourists. So one of my challenges this year when I was updating the Lisbon book was finding out how do we find an alternative to Tram 28. Tram 28 is the touristy tram. It's the one that is jam-packed. It's the one that you have to wait for a long time to get on, and it's the one that's got pickpockets on it because it's so darn packed with tourists. It's perfect for pickpockets. Well, we got to deal with that. And we deal with that by finding an alternative tram that is scenic, but not so trendy. This particular spot is something I've never encountered before, but we were just rolling around the city, having a beautiful time, and then up, everything stops. Something blocked the path. And I think all of the trams on that whole entire route were stacked up here. Must have been 6 or 8 trams in a row. And everybody had to either sit there or get out and walk. We got out and we walked, and that's fine. You just roll with the punches. There's trends happening for travelers all over the place. And that's what I really enjoy doing when I'm researching the guidebook is actually finding out what are the new innovations for tourism, what are the new dimensions of that industry, and what's working well and what's not. In a lot of cities, you got these little golf carts and these little 3-wheeled taxis called tuk-tuks, and they're handy for tourists, but they're not very popular with locals. And there's just this dynamic. You're reading about it now, even in the newspapers. People in Barcelona are starting to speak up against the tourists who are taking over big parts of their town and so on. So we got to sort through that. And it's more important than ever that we find ways to avoid the crowds. Another dimension of travel that in Europe that I think is fascinating and problematic is how when you see one of these little key boxes, you know that's a little apartment that is doing business as an Airbnb or some kind of a short-term rental system. And it's just a reality. People make a lot of money by renting out their apartments. And travelers save a lot of money by avoiding hotels and staying in these apartments. And the consequence is it's driving up rents locally, which means local people can no longer afford to live there, which means they move out to the suburbs. Tourists take over the apartment flats in the nice parts of town, and it changes the complexion of the business environment in that neighborhood. It's no longer catering to people who live there, but it's catering to tourists. And if you lived there and you're one of the last residents to live there, you feel like your city's been stolen from you by the tourists. This is an interesting issue, and we deal with it when we travel, and we have to decide what are the ethics of that, and how do we want to be involved in that. Well, a 2-hour train ride north of Lisbon takes you to the wonderful town of Porto. Porto, and this is my thing lately. We're working very hard to help travelers avoid crowds, and that doesn't mean avoid first cities like Paris, or Dublin, or Edinburgh, or Lisbon. But it means, remember, you've got second cities like Marseille, or like Glasgow, or like Belfast, or like Porto, that you can visit and enjoy those same cultures with a more creative edge and without the tourism, with more smiles, with less lines, and better prices. If you go to the second cities, I think you will travel better. And that's a dimension of travel that we're promoting in our work. Porto is a great example of that. So here's what I did while I was in Portugal. I started in Lisbon. I took it's about a 2.5 hour train ride, I believe, from Lisbon up to Porto. Great train ride. I just loved it. And then I went down to Coimbra, and then I went to Tomar, and then I went over to Nazaré. And from there I went back to Lisbon to fly to Hamburg. Just so you know, it's about 2 or 3 hours to get up to Porto, about an hour on the train to get from Porto to Coimbra, an hour on the train from Coimbra to Tomar. I actually hired an Uber to take me from Tomar to Nazaré. It cost me $100. I pay $100 when I take an Uber to the airport in Seattle, and it's about that. So, if there's a couple of you, if you're going from hotel to hotel, if you're hot and tired, I think $100 for a transfer like that is a pretty good deal. A couple days later, I took another $100 taxi ride from Nazaré directly to the airport in Lisbon. And that saved me several hours, and it gave me a relaxing ride in the back of a nice car. So you can mix your flights, your train trips, and your bus rides, and your Uber or your taxi rides as you and your budget allow. Porto. It's on the Douro River. And the Douro River is where this port wine is aged. The grapes are up the river in the quintas. And they take it down the river and they age in the port lodges across the way. Again, I'm drinking Taylor port, and there would be a lodge across the river there. There's like 15 different lodges, and one of them would be Taylor. And you could tour that. You can tour your favorite port wine lodge. Port Porto is a city of granite. It's said the locals have granite in their blood. It's just a mighty, heavy, stony city, and it's beautifully preserved in a sort of a time capsule from the Art Deco period, about 100 years ago. And when you go around town, you see these beautiful facades. Remember, they had a fascist dictator for about 40 years there or something, Salazar. And during that period, there was very little going on in the way of investment in the cities. And when that Salazar regime was gone, all of a sudden they woke up and they have this remarkably preserved cityscape. And the people of Portugal have done a beautiful job of protecting that. And now people are required to keep their facades the way they were and update them, and it makes for an amazing city in Porto. As a matter of fact, this is a McDonald's in an old Art Deco palace. And it's a beautiful stained glass window from 100 years ago, beautiful chandeliers. And if you zoom in, you can actually see the people dishing up their hamburgers and chicken McNuggets and so on. It's probably the most beautiful McDonald's I've ever seen is in this Art Deco palace in the city of Porto. I want to mention something here now just for a minute. I'm going to do it with the help of a video. But a big topic I hear lately is the crowds. I was just in Europe peak season. And I was there peak season because I want to know what's the reality for people. I could go off season, but I want to go peak season so I have your experience. And I found crowds were not a big issue if you're smart. However, if you just follow the trends, and if you do everything that's really hot on the internet, you're going to spend a lot of time needlessly in crowds. Here's an example. There's a beloved little bookshop in Porto that I used to pop into all the time. It used to be free. You'd go in there and it had a beautiful Art Nouveau interior with a great staircase. Suddenly, it got trendy. Now it's trending on the internet, it's on Instagram, everybody's talking about it. And today, plus it was mentioned it's associated with J.K. Rowling's. And today, you have to get in a long line, you have to pay $8 to get in, and I think it's just a fiasco. Here is the experience, and I'd like you just to listen to this. It's about a 2-minute video clip, so you can better appreciate not just the challenge in Porto to avoid this line, but all across Europe in your travels. You can be smarter about your time and not wait in these kind of lines needlessly. Hey, I'm Rick Steves. I'm in Porto, in Portugal, and I'm at the Lelo bookshop. Now, Lelo bookstore is a beautiful Art Nouveau period bookstore with an Art Nouveau facade and a beautiful winding, slinky staircase inside, which is great. But this is an example in Europe of ridiculous crowds where everybody just is attracted to a long line. There's a false rumor that J.K. Rowling was inspired here for something about Harry Potter, and it's probably fueled by Instagram craziness. But right now, this is the little beloved bookstore. You have to pay €8 and a voucher, but this is the line. This is the line to get into this bookstore. And you can spend half of your day to get into this bookstore, and you can see the line today. There's a lot of this construction and so on, but it's a 10-minute visit. You'll go in there and you'll see the fancy staircase. You can see it on a postcard anywhere in town. And all of these people are just following it was in J.K. Rowling's, or it's on Instagram or whatever. And you just got to be careful of that while you're traveling in Europe, because there are much more important things to do than follow the crowds fueled by social media. If you're suffering through a lot of crowds in Europe, 90% chance is you're the problem. You're part of the problem. Don't be sheep. Happy travels. I'll see you in a couple hours. I'm going to pay $10 to see a fancy bookstore. J.K. Rowling's. So I hope that you can remember when you're doing your trip be aware that lines are a big problem, not because more people are traveling, but more people are traveling at the same time, going to the same places. That's our challenge. And if you put yourself in the middle of that fray, you'll pay the price. But if you make a point to avoid those kind of bottlenecks, it's all right. And I can tell you that because I was just there, peak season, throughout Portugal and throughout Germany, having a wonderful time. And I can't remember ever really spending a lot of time in any lines anywhere. Hey, a fun thing to observe when you're traveling is how different cities take care of their land. I mean, here in Porto, they've got an underground parking lot. I love underground parking lots because they don't, clutter up the surface. And what do you do when you have an underground parking lot? Well, you put a park on top of it. And you got trees, you got shade, you got people out on a date, sitting under the tree, having a picnic, reading their book. There's even a little cafe up there. It's a beautiful opportunity. The whole center of town is quiet, it's pedestrianized, it is relying on public transit, and so on. One thing I really appreciate in my travels is my local guides. Our tour program would be nothing without our local guides. I couldn't do our TV shows without our local guides. Certainly couldn't do the guidebooks without local guides. This is Fatima, and she's my guide in Tomar. And Fatima is one of our tour guides, and she helps me when I'm in Portugal. This is Katja. She's in Martin Luther's town in Wittenberg in Germany. We're sitting there on the little stools that Martin Luther's wife, Katie, got him for his birthday. This is Sabrina, and we are in Erfurt. This is Michael, and we are in Dresden looking at some beautiful jewels. This is Jessica. We're learning about the public transit in Berlin. And this is Ian, and he's helping me in Hamburg. I have so much gratitude for the hardworking guides, and every one of those guides is hireable by you if you want to have a guide meet you at your hotel and show you and your family around in an intimate way. I mean, it's so great to have your own private guide. Of course, it costs some money, but if you have a group, it can be divided, of course, and I think it's really a great investment. Guides are less expensive in a country like Portugal than they would be in a country like Germany. Generally, you'll spend a couple $100 for half a day, of a private guide. This is Michael Dempsey. He's one of our Rick Steves guides, and I just happened to stumble into one of our tours. This would be in Hamburg on the first day of their tour. I just kind of surprised him, and it was really fun to see everybody there ready to take off on their Germany tour. This is one of our Rick Steves groups that I met in, where was I there? That was in Porto, in Portugal. And they were having, I believe it was like one of the last dinners of their trip, and good-looking smiles there. But boy, you bet makes my day to see a Rick Steves tour group having a great time. And during this period, peak season, we had 100 buses on the road at the same time. And this year, the tour program is going great. There's a little bit of COVID, but nobody's calling it COVID. It's just if somebody's got a cold, they put on a mask and stay in the back of the bus, and we just travel through it. And that's the way Europe does it, and that's the way people seem to like to do it these days. And I would remind you, you still should have a mask, and you still should be mindful of closed quarters without ventilation if you're with somebody that might be showing signs of COVID. But most people these days just travel right through their COVID and treat it like a bad cold. In Porto, we've got a beloved market, the Bolero market. And this used to be a higgly-piggly, ramshackle market, but today it's been totally renovated. We waited several years for it to be renovated, but now is it up to European Union standards. And I like it because it's the best of both worlds. It's got the hygiene and the respect for the employees that European Union insists on, but it's still got the cultural roots in that community. And it's where the people go to do their shopping. I'd love to show you a little video here that I did just on the fly with my friend Andre, who's a local food guy in Porto. But check this out, and you'll get a little bit of character of this, just this very, very important site in the town of Porto, 2 hours north of Lisbon in Portugal. Let's go. Hey, I'm Rick Steves. I'm in Porto in Portugal, and I'm in an amazing market. And I'm enjoying this particularly well because I'm with one of my favorite food guides in all of Europe, Andre.
Hello, Rick. Are you all right?
From Taste Porto Food Tours. And this is kind of exciting. This has been an example of a market that was old and characteristic, and now it's new and characteristic.
New and characteristic. I feel that the renovation updated the market to the 21st century, but it kept the gastronomical traditions here, and it gave the vendors the working conditions that they deserve to actually reinvent themselves, you know?
So this is interesting because a lot of people complain about EU regulations, and you can understand why there are some frustrations about that, but modern hygiene. This is owned by the city and cleaned every 3 hours or something like that.
Yeah, they keep the cleaning unit just going up and down. This way the market is pitch clean, but you also have these guys now with proper storage room, they have working conditions, and by having so, they've expanded the way they work.
And in good Portuguese pleasure activism, you can buy a glass of wine, wander around as you're buying your fruit, and you can leave the wine any place you like because it's got the initials of the little stall that sold you the glass of wine.
Yeah, precisely.
It's pretty cool.
It's the best way. You can arrive here at 10 a.m. because it's noon somewhere and just grab
Andre, you had demonstrated this cantaloupe, and this is such a delightful thing.
So fragrant.
Now, wait a second. Whoa, everybody likes to do that in the market, but give me another hit of that. So now, what is your fantasy about this little thing? What would you do?
When they're so fragrant as this one is, you just slice it open, take the seeds from inside, and in that hollow space, just add some port wine and have it for breakfast. Breakfast for grown-ups, man.
A breakfast for champions in Portugal. Port wine and a tasty in-season cantaloupe.
Yeah, and this is a cantaloupe that it's a short season in the year, really, but it's so flavorful. It's really worthwhile waiting for it to have it, and this is the time of the year for it.
And Andre, as you told me, this market evolves with the year. All year long it's evolving because everything has to be fresh and tasty. I'm Rick Steves. The name of this is Bolhão. The Bolhão market in Porto. You got to go to Porto when you get as far as Lisbon. 2 hours north. I had breakfast in Lisbon and an unforgettable lunch right here in Porto. Wow. I don't know about you, but that looks like a lot of fun. And when I'm doing my research, when I can find a scene like that, I just love to take notes and put that into the book and make sure that people know the best time to be there and what are the ins and outs. And sure, get a glass of wine, and it's got the shop's initials on it, so you can just leave it anywhere. They celebrate that kind of organization. By the way, Andre runs a great food tour. I'm, as you know, very into food tours, and we had so much fun filming him doing one of his tours. And if you ever wanted to see the entire, like a 6 or 7 minute food tour of Porto, you could go to Classroom Europe at ricksteves.com. Just go to the homepage at ricksteves.com, click on Classroom Europe. You see me holding out an apple to the teachers because it's my gift to teachers. And you've got your choice of 600 instantly searchable clips. And you could just type in food tour Portugal. You could type in Porto market and you would get the clip with Andre there, and you would be able to enjoy a little bit of that. You know, we've been talking about port. We're in Porto, and you can only call port if it's made in that part of Portugal, northern Portugal. And this is my port sipper. A friend of mine who wanted me to enjoy his port gave me 2 of these long time ago, and I managed to get them home without breaking them. And they are the sweetest little way to enjoy port. And I was just wondering about this, so I Googled it before our get together this evening. And I found out that the whole idea is this is a straw mechanism that goes to the bottom, and that way it minimizes oxidation. And what it says is just sit back and savor. And if you've been in Porto, and if you've been up the Douro Valley, and if you've actually seen the people who make this port and the love they have for their port, and you take home with you a little souvenir like that, your port sipper, it's a very nice way to go. Hey, I want to remind you, we could not do Monday Night Travel without our wonderful Monday Night Travel crew. And we've been bringing you Monday Night Travel almost every Monday now since the beginning of COVID. And we've had so much fun, we decided to keep going after COVID. Tonight we've got Gabe hosting, moderating, and we've got Lisa behind the scenes. And we're just thankful for your willingness to party with us each Monday and put our travel dreams, share our travel dreams. If you have any questions, Lisa's in the trenches right now answering questions, and you are welcome to ask a question. And Gabe will organize those with Lisa, and we'll get to those after my presentation. And I do want to remind you, again, when I'm done with the photographs, we'll have a few minutes for photos, and I look forward to that. Okay, let's carry on. We're in Port, 2 hours north of Lisbon. Ah, geez, I love that market. And it reminds me there are beautiful markets nowadays all over Europe. This is the big famous one in Lisbon. It used to be a thriving farmers market, but the farmers markets just can't make it these days. It doesn't work as a business. They can survive, but they have to share the space with little restaurants. And this is a way to showcase great restaurants in town that have a celebrity chef or whatever, and they've got a little spot here, and they put out their food tasting dishes, and it's a reasonable price, and you sit down with the locals, and you have quite a lovely spot for a lunch. Again, this is the big one in Lisbon. I don't list them all, but there's a lot of ones that are really good. You can feel the energy right here with this photograph. You've got communal tables, and you got 20 different restaurants to choose from, and it's just a food festival. It's interesting for me. I was with my guide in Lisbon and went to time out, but I really, for some reason, wanted to just get away from the glitziness. That's pretty slick. And I just wanted to go and find a working class, little hole-in-the-wall, no-name restaurant that I would never recommend. It's just a place that's handy across down a little street. And I wanted a bucket of snails. I mean, sometimes you just feel like a bucket of snails, don't you? And these, I just love this. When it's in season, you get these wonderful little snails, and you get a toothpick, and you drag them out, and you're having yourself a beautiful lunch. And I was having a lunch in this no-name restaurant, just enjoying it, and just marveling at the slice of life kind of joy. Sitting here with my local guide, a woman walked in with her child, with her little girl, and I got to watch the exciting moment when the girl had her 50 cents, and she was going to buy her little ice cream bar. And the merchant, who's the neighborhood merchant, he takes the money and gives her change and gives her ice cream. And it was just a beautiful learning experience, just like you and I have had, or like you and I would share with our kids. And there it was, in a little side street in Lisbon. And then later, I asked the guy came over and asked me if I wanted a coffee. And I said, sí, café com shady new. Café com shady new. And it just blew him away, because I knew the sort of working class jargon for give me a espresso with a shot of booze in it, a shot of brandy. Café com shady new. And it's just so fun to have these little kind of phrases that'll shock people who think you're just a clueless tourist. And you drop that, and you become all of a sudden sort of a special guest. And I got my shot of brandy for free in my coffee. And it's just what the old guy at the counter here would be drinking, is coffee com shady new. These are the little nuggets. These are the little weapons you arm yourself with to have a more intimate connection with the people that you're traveling to meet. And I, with my guides, get to understand. This is another one of my guides. And here I was in, I believe, Tomar, and looking around at restaurants. And when I'm done seeing all the restaurants in my book, I make sure I've got just enough time to sneak into my favorite restaurant of the evening and let them serve me whatever they want me to eat. And in this case, it was seafood arroz de marisco, I think in Portuguese. And my guide reminded me, never call the seafood rice dish paella in Portugal, because that's Spanish, and Portuguese don't like to be mixed up with Spain. And while you're at it, don't say gracias when you're in Portugal. It's obrigado. So these are fun little cultural sensitivities you pick up as you go. This was a great restaurant. It's already in my book. I love the energy of this restaurant, and I love the seafood arroz, and I love the woman who runs it. This is Miriam, and I asked her, I just kind of sweet talked her into giving me a variety of desserts, because I wanted to try her dessert plate. And I swear, I'm not into sweets that much, but this was such a delight. that I negotiated with her to put this in her menu for next year. And we're going to call it the Miriam's Dessert Taster Plate or something like that. And Miriam will now serve that to my readers who come next year to this cute little restaurant, because I want everybody to have that variety of local dessert taste treats. A charming moment at the end of my dinner was Miriam was done cooking, so she sat down with her cook's hat on and she played the piano just for her own joy. And you can see her daughter having dinner after doing her homework right next. Family-run little neighborhood restaurants where the chef will bring you an extra dessert, where the chef will sit down and play the piano, where you get to meet the daughter. Oh man, oh man. The moments you get when you travel through the back door, connecting with the people I've been so fortunate to connect with over the years. A friend of mine in Lisbon has a port, sort of a wine tasting shop. And you go there and you enjoy her different fine wines and ports. And she's always got just port to die for. And this is good. But what you're looking at now, is far better. And I said, I don't have time. We got to visit, 15 restaurants today. And she said, but I said, but bring out a little bit of cheese, just so I can have some cheese and maybe a cracker. And it took a little bit longer than I thought. And then they walk out with this board full of fruit and cold cuts, meat and cheese and lovely bread with the port. And I said, okay, relax, Rick, we'll call this dinner. So it was just a sweet experience. And these are the kind of places I get to discover and to share. And it doesn't cost a lot of money, that's for sure. And you get to meet a local and you get to learn about the local culture. One thing I like are the small family-run restaurants, and I found them all over Portugal. Places with small, handwritten languages, in one language menus. Small, handwritten in one language. That's where, and you can see the plates there, about 10 euros. It's about $10 for a dinner plate. And you've got wine by the glass for 5 euros, $5 for a glass of nice Portuguese wine. This is what I do every night when I'm on the road, is find restaurants that have a good vibe, restaurants that are one-offs, not chains, restaurants that are not only privately owned, but are owner-managed, owner-operated, where the husband and the wife that run the place are serving and cooking, where the staff is going to be there next year, the same people. This is just a charming cafe. Oh man, and I was so happy to have that in my book. Another thing I'm always looking for in my guidebooks is a good modern vegetarian place. Hippy-dippy, tie-dye vegetarian places are fun, but I also like just a very modern, healthy, fresh, clean, no stress, easygoing, air-conditioned restaurant for a quick vegetarian lunch. And I pretty much have a good vegetarian place in every city these days in my Rick Steves guidebooks. One thing that's very helpful when I'm doing my work is finding people who are there because of my books. Here's a family that's going to the best chicken restaurant in Lisbon. And I had a sense that they were Rick Steves readers, so I dropped in and I started a conversation with them. Turns out they were not only my readers, but they were coming to this restaurant for the second night in a row. And they just absolutely loved it. And I learned from them any of the challenges they had in ordering and how it worked and all that kind of thing. And I can write up a better description in my book. One thing I've enjoyed over the last 30 or so years is relationships with people like Mario. This is a guy who runs a great little restaurant in Rothenburg. And for 30 years, we've been connecting every time I'm in town. And he's been running a restaurant. In fact, his restaurant has the English Conversation Club. And every Wednesday night at 7 o'clock, he holds a table, the Stammtisch, the old regulars table, just for our readers and locals who want to get together and practice their German and their English. It's a cultural exchange. And it's such a beautiful thing to be able to help make that possible. So Mario can host that. He sells a little extra beer and a little extra wine and a few more dinners. And our travelers get to make friends with locals and practice their German and help the locals practice their English. These are people-to-people connections. Back in Porto, running around town with Andre, the guy who runs the food tour there, I'll never forget, we were just motoring to this next place on the list, and we walked by this bar that filled this triangular corner on the square here under a tree. And I just thought, wait a minute, stop, this is really cool. And we went in and we met the guy who runs the bar and we learned about it. And it's just a beautiful scene. And I got to add that to the book just because it tickled my fancy. It's a beautiful spot where we can enjoy the ambience of being out on the streets in a little town in Portugal. I was just stumbled onto a flea market. It was kind of a market day. And at the cafe next to the market, I saw this girl. She caught my eye because she's wearing a Boy Scout shirt. And it was the same shirt that I wore back a long, long time ago. So I had to come up to her and I said, "Hi, do you speak English?" Yeah. I just said, "I like your shirt. I used to wear one of those because I was a Boy Scout." And she said, "Yeah, I got this in a vintage store." So that put me in my place. Speaking of vintage, that same day, I met a girl who had my birth year tattooed on her arm. And I laughed and then I thought, wait a second, I got to go back in. What is that doing? Why do you have 1955 on your arm? And she said, "That's the birth year of my grandfather, and I love my grandpa." So I took a photograph of this because I've got a little grandson now, and I'll just hint on that. I don't like tattoos very much, but if you want to put 1955 somewhere, Atlas, you're welcome to do that. But this is just our baby Atlas. Some of you know that I'm very happy this year because Atlas is in our lives. Atlas is about 20 months old now. My daughter Jackie and her husband Damien's beautiful son. And we just took him down to the airport yesterday. But Atlas is turning into a lot like Bam Bam Flintstone. I mean, that he looks like Bam Bam, and he approaches the world like Bam Bam too. That's Atlas, man. Oh man, stay tuned. Okay, Coimbra. This is the Oxford of Portugal. This is the university town of the historic university town, the venerable university town. And I love visiting Coimbra. It's one of my favorite cities in Portugal. And one thing I found was more and more clever ways to have the tourists understand the history. I mean, these towns go back, more than 1,000 years. And here you can see in a museum, there was a bridge there put there by the Romans a long time ago, 2,000 years ago. It's a fortified town. There's the wall's long gone, but there's a circular road at the same spot of the wall. And up on the top, you've got the remains of the castle. That's where the university would be today. And you've got the cathedral. I mean, the cathedral today is the same as that building with the single spire in the middle there. So you can see a lot. And they were on rivers because they had water mills there, and that powered their life. All over Europe, very clever exhibits are showing how towns were born with a fortified castle, with a stockade, with a small little village at a trade crossroads. It's so fun to see what kindles civilization. One thing that kindles civilization is higher education. And all over the world, higher education comes with crazy fraternities. In Coimbra, it's a university town, and you see apartment flats like this decorated in a crazy way, hanging all sorts of memories outside on the wall. And that would be the home of a fraternity. They're called Republics fraternity in Coimbra. This is Fatima again. She was leading one of our groups through Coimbra. I got to jump on the bus and say hi to everybody. Looks like they're having a good time on a Rick Steves tour there, I got to say. Man, oh man. Fatima was my guide when I took the tour. I like to sign up with a pseudonym. I signed up on her tour with my pseudonym on the roster. Nobody knew I was on the tour, and had a wonderful time. And I'm so glad right now that we have a very popular tour program in Portugal. This is our itinerary. This is the heart of Portugal. It's 12 days. Cost about $4,000. We're all sold out this year, but I just checked and we've got plenty of seats open in 2025 for this itinerary. But I'm showing you this route because I did basically my 2 weeks in Portugal in this area. And I went from Lisbon to the top to Porto, had my wine from the Douro Valley, went down to Coimbra. And then our groups would go to Nazaré, which we'll go in just a moment. And then they go to Óbidos. And Óbidos is this is Óbidos. It's really a touristy town. It's a lovely town. But our guides are advocating to go to this town called Tomar, which has almost no tourism. And I spent the night in Tomar because I want to know what our guides are all excited about. And I love Tomar. And this is Fatima's hometown. And it's a town that has a beautiful history. It's a town that's got a Roman bridge. It's got a town that's got the remnants of old medieval mills along the river. And it's a town that has a castle on the top that has a medieval oratory, which was the center of the Templar Knights. This was one of the most important places in Iberia in the Middle Ages. And this oratory here, this eight-sided place of worship, was where the Knights Templar would have their headquarters. And their mission was to provide security for all the pilgrims that went to the Holy Land. And they provided the first kind of banking, the first kind of traveler's checks for all the pilgrims that went to the Holy Land. They would give their money here, and they would take with them checks. And they could spend those checks at different places along the way, and they would not have the danger of being ripped off and mugged and some bandits taking all their goodies. Of course, if they died somewhere along the route, the Knights Templar would get all of what they put in the bank. And that way, the Knights Templar became very, very wealthy and huge landowners, and you learn a lot about it when you're in Tomar. Another thing you learn when you're in Tomar is about matchbook art. I want to stress when you're traveling, don't neglect the fact that there are cool, funky, obscure, esoteric little museums all over the place on topics you never knew were interesting. This is thousands and thousands of matchbooks. There's 7 rooms filled with matchbooks from all different countries. This would be matchbooks from the Soviet Union. Wow. This would be, these are naughty matchbooks. These are matchbooks, I don't know from where, but that's kind of what guys would have for entertainment in a very olden days. Here we have Rosier and Harley and Luziere and Evian, all on matchbooks, historic matchbooks. You can see that when you're in Tomar. 1 hour away, we've got Nazaré. Nazaré, when I first went there, it was littered with colorful fishing boats all along that beach. Now they dug a harbor, you see at the top of the shot. All the boats are in the harbor and all the tourists are on the beach. The beach is a glorious place for a vacation, and there are still lots of fishermen and lots of fisherwomen. And the women are out drying their husband's catch in the sun. And that's quite an interesting spectacle. And the big spectacle in town, however, is the highest waves on the planet. 100-foot tall waves. This is not my photograph, but it's just an illustration. You can see the surfer there in the middle of this wave. Ha! Look at that guy. And today people go out to this tip and they marvel at the images because they've seen it online. If you are curious, Nazaré is the town. You can Google it and watch on YouTube this spectacular surfing. Okay, from Nazaré, I took the 1 hour Uber ride to the airport and I flew to Hamburg direct. It was a beautiful flight. And I went from Hamburg to Berlin, to Wittenberg, to Leipzig, to Dresden, to Erfurt, to Rothenburg in 2 weeks. Just so you know, going from Hamburg to Berlin was about a 2.5 hour train ride. Berlin to Wittenberg was 45 minutes. Wittenberg to Leipzig, 45 minutes. Leipzig to Dresden, 45 minutes. Dresden to Erfurt, an hour. Erfurt to Rothenburg, about an hour. And then I took a 2-hour drive to the airport in Frankfurt to fly home. It was a great opportunity to use the trains. I love Hamburg. Hamburg is the sort of a second city in Germany. Very, very few Americans. Very, very few tourists outside of Germans in Hamburg. Of course, Hamburg is an important port town, and if you're an important port town and your country is starts a war, you're going to get destroyed. And Hamburg was destroyed with a firestorm, just a horrific firestorm. So heavily bombed that the fire actually created its own climate and it started sucking in everything and it fed itself and the whole city was an inferno. Tragic. It's been rebuilt today beautifully and there are fascinating museums about the experience of living in Hamburg during this period. I mean, it was, Germans had to be ready for this and they had all sorts of propaganda that says, it's okay, you just have to have one of these in case we're bombed and then you can keep your baby alive in this protective, cage. And if you want to rock her or him to sleep, you can do that. If you need to get some air there, you pump it with your feet. and it's all very easy to do and live through. It was normalizing war. It's a scary thing when war becomes normal as the society goes crazy. And today, of course, Germany has learned its lesson, and you've got the remains of churches, and in those churches you've got memorials, and if you read the memorials closely, it's always something that's very emotional. Dietrich Bonhoeffer wrote, "No man in the whole world can change the truth. One can only look for the truth, find it, and serve it. The truth is in all places." It's an emotional time to be traveling. I was in Hamburg for 3 nights and 2 days, and I never used a bus or a subway. I just rented the bike from my hotel, and I did everything by bike. It's a wonderful city by bike. There's a handful of cities in Europe that I do by bike. I do Munich by bike, I do Copenhagen by bike, I do Hamburg, and I do Amsterdam, of course, by bicycle. More and more cities are becoming bike friendly, and that's just the way to get around a city like Hamburg. Hamburg is preparing for climate change. It's on a river, a tidal river, and they're ready for higher sea levels. So they've built this levee that's much higher than it used to be, and the houses behind it are on stilts. So the ground floor is only for parking these days when they make a new building. But it's a good-looking levee, but it is kind of haunting to me because it is dealing with the reality that humanity, under the leadership of the United States, is not able to grapple with climate change. Right now in our country, there's actually a leading party with about half of the votes in the country that is saying flat out, let's drill oil. We don't need to worry about climate change. We can just have more air conditioning, and we can put sunscreen on our faces, and we just can't afford to deal with climate change. I just can't believe that people are not able to reckon with the reality that we are warming up our planet by putting carbon into the atmosphere. There's a solution, but the solution is not catering to people's wimpiness and promising them we don't need to deal with this problem, let our children deal with this problem. That is a stark political choice, ladies and gentlemen. And the rest of the world is paying the price, as are we. But the United States is the one country that can inspire this world to deal with climate change instead of ignore it. And when you travel, you see the consequences of climate change and the consequences of countries that don't have the foresight and the economic power to build up their levees. As I mentioned, there's not a lot of English language tourists in Hamburg. I love Hamburg. It's got my favorite harbor, industrial harbor, anywhere in Europe. But I was sad to find this year that there are no more tours of the harbor in English. There's scores of tours every day in German, but not a single tour with a live guide in English. You can hear the recorded information in English. But this is just indicative of a city that is a great city to visit because it doesn't have the international crowds. No international crowds in Hamburg. This is the new part of town that used to be the rundown industrial part, but then that was bulldozed and turned into a modern city. It's called Hafen City, the harbor city. And next to that is something called Speicherstadt, which is literally the storage city. And Hamburg was the big industrial shipping port of Germany. And at one time, it was one of the biggest ports in the world. When Germany united, it needed a port, and this was it. Today, the port is moved out to accommodate the container ships. And what you've got is that trading heritage, decorating state-of-the-art residential area, a mix of luxury and government subsidizes housing and apartments and condos, business on the ground floor, people live upstairs, lots of culture, lots of public transportation, lots of parks, lots of schools. It's a fascinating look at a futuristic town on an industrial wasteland that has been turned into a highly developed residential part of a great city. One 7-story apartment or warehouse that you see in the distance here was capped in the last decade by a huge concert hall. And today that's the Elbphilharmonie. And it is an amazing concert hall, and it's an amazing feather in the cap, architectural cap of Hamburg. And tourists can go up there for free and enjoy a 360-degree view around that amazing concert hall. Germans love their digital data information panels. You see them all over the place. And generally they're in English and in German. Here we see, for example, a street in Berlin that is being renovated. And you can see on the right half of this photograph how pedestrian friendly it is. It's pedestrians, bikes, and good luck to anybody who has a car. Well, they're explaining that in this little panel here. And as travelers, we can go to these kind of trendy little happening neighborhoods and see how Germans are better living. This is the Speicherstadt, and that is the storage city. And these were the massive warehouses that were built in the 1880s after Germany united to handle all that trade. Of course, today the trade is gone because with the advent of container ships, it can't get the ships into these little spots. So the container ships a few miles down the river, or up the river, down the river, yeah. And what you got here is shops and tourist attractions. One of the most popular, actually the most visited site in all of Europe, or not all of Germany, is a place that most Americans have never heard of. It's called Miniature Wonderland. And it's the biggest train set in the world. It's 5 floors of trains that are going through all different countries. Amazing. And, you know, if you've traveled, you go, oh, look at that. That's Atrani right next to Amalfi. Wow, that's really cool. In Italy. So you've got, here, I'm going to just read, I've got my, the way I write it up in my guidebook, just so you know kind of what we've got. The most fun site within Big Block D complex and all this harbor is worth its high entry fee. Miniature Wonderland claims to have the world's largest model railway, covering over 16,000 square feet with more than 9.5 miles of track. Marvel at the tiny airport with model planes taking off, and watch nightfall every 15 minutes. Visit the Alps, Scandinavia, Italy, and the United States in miniature, the latter complete with a shootout. Little bits come to life with a press of a button. Bungee jumpers leap, the drive-ins play a movie, and tiny Bavarians host teeny beer mugs to their mini mouths. Hamburg's harbor is lovingly rendered, including the building you're standing in right now, with a model of the Elbphilharmonie that lets you peek inside. So that's the old write-up. I've got a better write-up now because I just was working on that. But look at this cool place. I mean, a stadium that you can look down into. Well, that's for the kids and the families. And for adult entertainment, in Hamburg, you've got Reeperbahn. This is where the Beatles came of age. They say the Beatles were born in Liverpool, but they grew up in Hamburg. And this is the Reeperbahn. Reeperbahn was the old red light district. Red light districts are shrinking away these days, but it's still a place with lots of parties, lots of drinks. McDonald's is kind of swimming in topless bar advertisements. And and then we're on our way. From Hamburg, it's a 2-hour train ride. These train stations, I just love. The trains are super fast and they're super modern. I kind of cringe when I think how out of date my old photographs are of how the train signage is, because the new signage is just really cool. And I just love being on German trains. And even a small city, this is Leipzig, not a great city, it has a massive train station. The train stations, by the way, all over Germany and other countries as well, are important from a shopping point of view. If you need something on a Sunday, a lot of times this is the only place in town that's open on Sunday, and everything's open at the train station on Sunday. Now, this is the first year I have used a digital Eurail pass. I used to live out of Eurail passes. I get them every year. I haven't had one for a few years. I got one for this trip, and it was really fun. It really works well. You download the app, and I got a 12-day, I got a 7-day in 1 month Flexi Pass. It costs $247 for first class. Now, 7 days in a month means you get 7 days where you can travel anywhere on the trains in 1 month period. So you download the app, you pay the money, you get the, you upload the actual pass, and you lay out what you want to do with your trip on your trip plan. And then whenever you want to spend a day, you just load it up onto your pass and you've got it. And you can see where it's going to go. And the conductor comes by and you got to show them what you're doing. You show them the QR code and it's all right on your phone. And it is so cool. In Portugal, I had to get reservations, which is a drag. I had to go to the station in order to get a reservation in order to go later on. But in Germany, I just hopped on the trains anywhere, and it was slick. I'm all for that Eurail pass. And something I learned, which is kind of handy, maybe it's obvious to you, but you can get out your phone and locate where your train is if you wonder where's the next stop or where's your stop. It's very easy to do that just using the GPS on your phone to see where your train is. Okay, so in Germany, I have some wonderful German guides. This is Holger. And with Holger, I went to see the Reichstag. And when we go to the Reichstag, we're talking about seeing this monument to the politicians who were killed by Hitler. And this is a very, very powerful monument. And I'm a historian, and I'm a traveler, and I'm somebody who cares deeply about our country. We all do, I would assume. But I've got a different angle on things because I'm a historian and I'm a traveler and a tour guide and a travel writer. And it's monuments like these that cause me to think. Did you know that when Hitler took power, the first people he arrested for the concentration camps were the people who stood against him in their government, the senators and the representatives. And he sent them to concentration camps. These were the first inmates at concentration camps. And they went in there in the early 30s, and they stayed until the last year of the war. And then Hitler kept him there until he knew he was going to lose the war. And then what he did was he murdered them all. These were important, caring citizens. And I was inspired to make a video here, and I'd like to share it with you. And it's just a very thought-provoking thing as we think about the value of freedom, the fragility of freedom, and the importance of this election that's coming up. Because history is speaking to us loud and clear. And woe to those who underestimate the value of the lessons of history. Hey, I'm Rick Steves. I'm in Berlin. I'm standing in front of the People's House here. That's the Reichstag. And Berlin is so steeped in history, and you got to be thinking of their nightmare with fascism. And Hitler was elected to their parliament. And he was part of a coalition, and his party was in the minority, but he ended up legally becoming the chancellor and then the dictator because he just wanted to be dictator for a day. And there was a handful of people in here who opposed Hitler, refused to do the proper salute, refused to kiss his ring and wear his uniform. And these were the Kinzingers, the Liz Cheneys, the Mitt Romneys, the Charles Schumers, and so on of German democracy in 1932. Well, 95 of them or something like that were arrested as soon as Hitler took power. These are the representatives and the senators of Germany that were sent to concentration camps, the first concentration camps in 1934. And what is striking to me that I just learned is most of these, generally people died after a couple of years. These people were kept alive until 1945. 1945. Hitler kept them alive, the leaders of the political opposition against him, until it was pretty clear that he was going to lose the war. And then, in 1945, these courageous politicians in Germany who stood up against fascism were murdered by that guy. Think of what can happen to a society that doesn't take the threat of autocracy seriously and doesn't value how fragile and precious democracy is. Oh my goodness. I learned so much when I travel, and I'm so thankful for that. And I bring those lessons home. Rick Steves in Berlin. Meaningful travels. I don't know. When I hear the word retribution, I can't help but think about this. And when you go to Germany, there are so many memorials. How does the society remember all of the boys that died in the wars when they were the bad guys? They don't call them heroes of that war. They call them victims of tyranny. I never want to live in a country where we have to remember victims of tyranny. There's a lot of victims in Germany. There's a lot of hard history in Germany. And when you're in Berlin, the city is covered with memorials. This is the bombed out headquarters of the Gestapo and the SS, the topography of terror. It's a powerful exhibit. And right next to it is a brand new one that I had never seen, and I was so thankful to be able to see it. It's the Documentation Center for Displacement, Expulsion, and Reconciliation. It's the world's first museum all about forced migration. And it's a state-of-the-art historical museum with great exhibits and all sorts of contemporary relevance. It's right there. It's free. It's well worth checking out. Because refugees is what's driving a lot of people to react fearfully within their own countries. The autocrats in Europe leveraging fear of refugees in order to get into power. And the world has some sorting out to do to take care of people. So they're not desperate, because you cannot build a wall high enough to keep out the refugees. Germany does a good job of trying to house the refugees that come in. But I think we need to go to the roots of the problem and find ways to help people stay at home. It's a harsh, complicated world, and you deal with it when you travel, if you're traveling with your eyes open. Thomas Jefferson said, travel makes a person wiser, if less happy. I love the way that travel puts me in connection with our world. This is the Unter den Linden Boulevard that cuts through Germany, and they've fixed it up really beautiful. There's a whole island full of museums called the Museum Island. Great museums. This is a museum sort of model of the Museum Island in the center of Germany. You see the big church there. That's the cathedral. It looks medieval, or looks Baroque, but it's late 19th century. It's historicism done in a Baroque style, but neo-Baroque style or neo-Renaissance style. Across the street was the big palace, and that was torn down after the war. It was built up as a very nondescript people's palace in communist times. Today, it's been rebuilt and opened, and it's a beautiful place to check out. Right across the street from the cathedral is the new, it's called the Humboldt Forum. And in the Humboldt Forum, there's a lot of museums. One of them is called the Berlin Global. And you go through here and you put on a wristband, and it monitors your reaction to the different exhibits. And when you walk through a door, when you leave a room, you choose which door to walk through, and it logs you up a certain way. And when you sample little spices that used to be imported and you respond, it logs you up a certain way. And when you're all done, you get a printout that analyzes all of your reactions, and it kind of lets you know what you really think. I'm not that into these, interactive museums, but this one was really good. My friend Holger was more interested in freedom. I, surprising to myself, according to my reactions, was more interested in security. Fascinating opportunity when we travel. Now, this is a big mural that survives from communist times. It's a beautiful mural that celebrates this communist sort of ethic of workers' paradise, of course, impossible utopia, but you'll see that when you're in town. If you know where to go, you can find a library where you have a big stained glass window featuring one of the most famous students in that library, Lenin. And you've got little remnants of communist times. Since 1990, of course, Germany has been free, but you've got these goofy DDR kind of memorials and a lot of DDR architecture throughout Berlin. And I find fascinating museums that give us a slice of life look at what Germany was like so long ago. The harsh museums in almost every city now, there's the Stasi Museum that tells how the secret police kept the people down and kept an eye on the secret police. There was a huge army of informants in Germany, there where everybody was informing on everybody. And when the war was over, a lot of people had this very difficult choice. Am I gonna want to look in my files and see which ones of my neighbors and my friends and even my loved ones were informing on me? And a lot of people chose not to look in their files at the Stasi. You can learn a lot about that and a lot about the spy cameras that look like buttons and so on when you go to the Stasi museums. There's sort of a celebration of the victory of capitalism over communism in Berlin. And here we got slices of the Berlin Wall put up on Potsdamer Platz. Today, these are ingloriously covered in chewing gum. And it's kind of odd to see these slices of the wall today covered with chewing gum, but it is just sort of the march of history. Beautiful thing about Berlin is the public transportation. I made a point to learn how to use it. And when you harness those trams, They connect into downtown, they connect into the underground trains, and all of a sudden you are empowered. Berlin is a bunch of neighborhoods, and I had a lot of fun as I was researching on this last trip, checking out the different neighborhoods. A beautiful neighborhood is the Turkish neighborhood, Kreuzberg, and wonderful restaurants in Kreuzberg, wonderful scenes. This is on a market, on a bridge in a beautiful neighborhood, and you got like a 7-Eleven store nearby where you can buy your drink, and then you go out and you have it. I made a little video here to share with you about the scene, how any one of us could be part of the scene on a bridge like this in the Turkish district in Berlin for about $2. Check this out. Yeah, I'm Rick Steves. I'm in Berlin, and I'm in a little convenience store with a good selection of beer. And, they got the big supplier there, and then they got all the cold drinks there, and they got quite a list. And this is called a bar to go, a pub for the road. And then you get your drink, and you head out here, and you've got this amazing scene. Of course, you got cute little pubs. You've got a thriving pizzeria. You got lots of graffiti. A lot of people just having a good time. This is the old Turkish quarter of Berlin called Kreuzberg. And it's been quite thriving lately as it becomes more discovered and more popular and times get good. Here you can go for your pizza, take the kids out, park your bike. But the real action for me, which I really like, is for €2, you buy yourself your choice of a good German beer, and you grab your travel partner, and you come out here on Admiral's Bridge. And on Admiral's Bridge, you just get to make the scene. And you can do that. You could be here with all these young at heart people on the canal, the old industrial canal in Berlin, and maybe you've got a bicycle, maybe you don't. Maybe it's a real hot day where the asphalt actually gets the bottle cap slammed into it because it's so darn hot. But the main thing is, you've done your sightseeing, you've earned yourself a nice memorable dinner, you don't have a lot of money to blow, you want to hang out with the local kids, and you just grab your sandwich, your slice of pizza, or whatever, your beer, and you enjoy a little bit of the old Turkish quarter in Berlin. It's called Kreuzberg, and this is called travel. I'm Rick Steves, and I'm making my guidebook better than ever in a great city, Berlin. Man, that is a cool scene. And I want to remind you, you can have it all over Berlin. You've got cool, inviting neighborhoods. Another neighborhood like that is called Prenzlauenberg. Prenzlauenberg was one of the rundown neighborhoods of DDR, Eastern Berlin. And in the last 40 years or so, it's become gentrified. And today, it's still got a little bit of that crustiness, but you've also got very nice neighborhoods. The rent has gone way up. The parks are filled with families. And if there's a gap between two buildings, it's probably where a bomb fell back in 1943 or 44 or 45. A lot of parks fill the gaps between the buildings where the bombs fell. I noticed, I was over there the whole time during the Euro Cup, the great soccer tournament in Europe, and it is all consuming in Portugal and in Germany. Every night people were gathered in front of the TV, it seemed like. I noticed while I was in Germany, if you had a beer garden without a TV screen, you didn't have a lot of people going there if the soccer game was on. Everybody was gathered around TV screens everywhere you looked. And they had little mini markets, this says drink market there, little 7-Elevens. And they would put out, little boxes from their, supplies and just make makeshift chairs, set up their TV, and people would buy a beer for $2 and they've got a party. Everywhere I went, when the soccer game was on, everybody was out with the TV screens in makeshift theaters, getting into it. Portugal, yeah, it's really kind of fun. I wish I appreciated soccer. I don't really, but I do appreciate the fun that happens all over Europe. when it is a big match. Here in Berlin, actually, these pictures are from all over, and it was just every night, lots going on. I've got a favorite nut store in Kreuzberg, and it was filled with chairs, and people were munching on various nuts. Here's an Iraqi restaurant in Kreuzberg where I had dinner, and when they got a goal, man, it was uproarious. Oh, baby. And it was fun just to be out and about. I've got this idea that if you see a bunch of guys sitting on a bench, the idea is to ask them to scoot over. You want to connect with the locals. I mean, I've been saying this ever since I was a kid. This is me back when I was a college student. And I took this slide, this shot, and I always say in my lectures, say, if you see four cute guys sitting on the bench, ask them to scoot over, you know. Meeting people carbonates the experience. Well, it works. And I had a fun moment with these guys, enjoying a little bit of the game. When you look at the art, it gives you a romantic look at how countries see themselves through history. I love that romantic art from the late 1800s. And one romantic idea is that Europe should control Africa. Of course, it's craziness, but this is a poster from way back then, just when after Germany was united. And look at the matter-of-fact way on this poster from, 140 years ago or something, where there's actually, it says Europa and the African colonies. Okay, Europe and its colonies. And you even have the country codes: Deutschland, England, France, Italy, Holland, Belgium, Portugal, and Spain. And then you look down here and you see color-coded which bits of Africa went to which countries. Of course, Germany was late to the game, so they scrambled in the late 1800s to get their piece of the pie, their place in the sun. And it led to a lot of tension, and it actually led in a lot of ways to World War I. And all the tumult that followed that. And historians will look back at the 20th century, and they'll see World War I and World War II, I think, as just two parts of the same war. And some of it had to do with Europe struggling to figure out what to do in the way of its tending to its endless greed for colonies. We're living in a time when there's a lot of reconsideration of these ways of seeing history and colonization and slavery and so on. I mean, when you're in Portugal, it's all about Henry the Navigator and the monument to the discoverers. Well, it's no longer the discoverers. Nobody discovered America. It was already discovered. They colonized America, or they conquered America, or they realized there was an America. But when you study the age of discovery, that's what it's called, the age of discovery, you realize how Eurocentric it was, and how planting the flag or planting the Christian cross was really declaring ownership of a land's natural resources and its people. And this is a hard reality for those of us in the rich, wealthy world to grapple with, and we're doing it now. I noticed any time these days a museum has been renovated, it's renovated with a new sensibility. The old white Eurocentric view of things is changing. And here we have a good example. You can read right here in a great museum, and it could be anywhere, because all over Europe, this is what I've noticed this year. The headline: The Rediscovery of Classical Antiquity in the 18th Century and the Repression of Slavery as a Historical Phenomenon. That's radical, and that's what's happening these days. You can look even further on that, and you can see at the bottom it says, to this day, memory of European slavery and slave trading is repressed. In the 17th century Dutch painting and an 18th century German painting, black people abducted to Europe unwillingly became part of an orchestrated movement of slavery and abundance. My goodness. And when we think of the treatment of women historically, and the treatment of people of color, and then we see the new treatment, we're realizing that museums are finally getting their act together. You're seeing nowadays in museums information panels that will admit portrayals of women were frequently imbued with eroticism and defined by stereotypical role models. Female artists at the time faced working conditions that were much more difficult than those of their male counterparts. To mention one example, the doors of the academies of art remained closed to them back then. Nevertheless, female artists such as Dora Hitz and Lila Cabot Perry were gradually beginning to make a name for themselves on both the German and the international art market. So it's really exciting and fun to see how Europe and art museums all over the world and guidebooks are taking a new look at how we have portrayed people that through the ages have been neglected and downtrodden. Speaking of great art, every bit of Germany has a sausage that it is very proud of. And when you go to Leipzig, for example, you gotta have the Leipzig sausage. And this lady sees a smile right there. I had so many sausages that I had to be careful to have a healthy breakfast in the morning. Each morning I decided to eat healthy, and it cut me a little snack for my eating habits for the rest of the day. I do want to remind you that when I'm traveling and when you're traveling, you do need to wash your clothes. And I think it's interesting. A lot of people are stressed out by washing your clothes. Hey, it's just a little work. It takes 15 minutes for me to wash my laundry. It's hard work. You scrub, you wring, you hang up, you scrub, you wring, you hang up, and you get it done. It takes 15 minutes. It would take 15 minutes to gather your laundry together and go find a laundromat, pay for it, and then go back later to get it again. It would take a lot more time and a lot more money. So I just see it as exercise. I was gone for 28 days. I had to wash my clothes 3 times. You can do the arithmetic and see how often I changed my socks and underwear. It works really well. So don't get too stressed out about laundry. One thing I'm noticing is all over Europe, they're investing in new experiences. And these are historic experiences that have no artifacts. And frankly, I do not like them. I don't recommend them in my books. And they're family friendly and they can be educational. But I'm going there to see real artifacts. You can read a book if all you want to do is have an education. I want to see the real thing. And all over our travels these days, we need to concern ourselves with, do we need reservations? And Europe is getting really good at accommodating crowds. They learned during COVID that they can monitor the crowds and minimize how many people are crushing in at a time. And you just got to go to the websites, ask questions, read your guidebooks, and know where do you need reservations in advance, and where is it a good idea and where is it not necessary. Generally, you don't need to worry about it, but there are a few places where it is critical, and you just got to do your homework. Okay, hopping on the train again, we get to the town of Martin Luther. This is Wittenberg, where Luther taught and hung out and kicked off the Protestant Reformation. And anybody who's a fan of Luther loves to come here. It's kind of a pilgrimage. And even people who aren't churchgoers and don't care about the whole Reformation thing, they really need to appreciate the fact that when Luther mobilized the printing press and wrote in the local language, he was the first mass-produced writer. He was the first writer whose work went viral. And he got in big trouble because he made the Word of God accessible to regular people because it was no longer in Latin, but it was not only in German, it was printed cheaply with the printing press instead of hand transcribed by monks. And this really rocked the boat. And he had to hide out. He grew a beard. I got a beard too. We just got together there for a moment. And this is Martin Luther when he's in his Junker George costume, Hunter George. A wonderful museum about Luther and the Reformation in Wittenberg. Some of the first editions of the Bible that he translated into German. And in many places in Germany now, there are big 360-degree murals painted by a Berlin artist. I think his name is Assisi. And it's photorealism, and it's big, and it's all-encompassing, and it's round. And this takes you back to 1517 in Germany with the Reformation. Or this takes you in Berlin back to 1985 with the wall and people peering over the wall and what life was like. Another great art is by Canaletto, famed for his portraits of Venice, but he lived and worked in Dresden also. And you'll see beautiful paintings of Dresden when you're in Dresden by Canaletto. I was in Dresden, and there was a rally going on. And my guide told me every Monday we have a rally, and the right-wingers here get together, and they have their Russian flags and their German flags, and they've even got flags that have the German flag and the Russian flag put together. And this is sort of got an angry edge to it. And these are these kind of guys that are going to, demonstrate for far-right causes. And then you got police keeping people apart and peaceful. And then on the far left, you've got the people that believe in democracy that are counter-demonstrating with the right-wingers. So this is happening all over Europe these days, just like in the United States. Some people are standing up for liberty, viva a liberdad, and some people are standing up for fascism. And recently, just in the last couple of weeks, I think England and France voted in favor of democracy. But there are countries like, Hungary and Turkey that are sticking with the far-right approach to government. It's poignant in Dresden because you're surrounded by buildings that were rebuilt after 1945. This is the beautiful Frauenkirche, which was destroyed by the bombs near the end of the war. This burned out cross used to be on the top of the old church. They've got it there as a memorial for peace. And then nearby, you've got a boulevard that was the main boulevard of communist Dresden that is today thriving as capitalism has pushed the communist government away. And nearby, we've got Rothenburg, my final stop of this trip. I just love Rothenburg. I came in, haven't been there for a few years, got to hang out with the mayor and the leader of the tourism department. They're really thankful for all of our business that comes there because tourism butters the bread in Rothenburg. Beautifully preserved town. I just love hanging out in Rothenburg. This is a pre-Raphaelite type painting of my favorite door in Europe, the back door. That was on the cover of my first editions of my Europe Through the Back Door book. This is at the City Hall. It's a reminder during feudalism, Germany was a couple hundred little independent countries, dukedoms and fiefdoms, each with its own weights and measures. So if you're a merchant and you're trading stuff, you have to have some way to set the standard of what is a yard and what is a foot. What I'm measuring there with my forearm is what's called an elbow. And my forearm's a little short, but that would be an elbow. The dimension right next to my hand is a foot, and that would be the medieval foot if you're a trader in Rothenburg. Beautiful art in Rothenburg. My friend George is the night watchman, and he's 5 nights a week. He's still giving his tours. He's just fabulous. And I was in Rothenburg last week, and I was just wandering around. I turned a corner, and I wandered up this alley, and it was like a deja vu. I looked at this little cottage, this gingerbread cottage, half timbered, built into the wall. And I remembered this was where my parents stayed when they took me to Rothenburg 55 years ago, when I was 14 years old, 1969. And I remember when I got there, it was like one of these amazing deja vus. And I remember the old lady that ran that place and rented out the Zimmerfrei. And when she brought us our breakfast, she saw me and she pulled down the empty flab of skin on her arm. You know how people that can do that when they get really old. And there was a scar in her arm. And it was on this side and it was on that side. It went right through her arm. She pulled it down and showed me, this impressionable 14-year-old from America. And she said, I lived through World War II and I survived. But I have this to remember. Wow. Well, this is the cottage. And I just thought, I'm really blessed to have so many vivid memories over these years from my travels. And it really is fun to be able to write those down, incorporate them into my guidebooks and tours and TV shows, and hopefully help people have their own experiences. So far this year, I've been to Europe 3 times. You can see it by my steps. In March, I was in Europe. In April, May, I was in Europe. And in June, July, I was in Europe. Good exercise, lots of fun. And on that last day, a week ago, just 8 days ago now, 6 o'clock in the morning, all packed up, just like when I left home, waiting for my ride. And 12 hours later, I was in Seattle. Hey, before I go, I want to let you know I had a great little vacation when I got home. That was me a long time ago before I ever went to Europe. And I grew up on a boat with my mom and dad and my sister there, Jan. And we just lived up in the San Juan Islands each summer, every weekend up in the San Juans. My dad's biggest boat, they got bigger and bigger over the years, was a boat like this. And what's interesting to me is I never quite took to the boating like my dad did. But my son, Andy, is really into boating, just like his grandpa. And Andy he chartered this 40-foot sailboat for a couple of weeks. And this was the boat. And I joined him for a couple of days just after I got home and got to hang out with his fiancée, Scarlett. And this is the first time I had seen them since they got engaged. So Andy's engaged to a wonderful Scarlett, and they had a beautiful time together, and they would host different people from our family as we came and went. But it was so fun to be up in the San Juan Islands, just like when I was a little kid, and we got some good wind, and I got to see Andy with his mastery of the sailboat. And we just had a great opportunity there to celebrate a little good travel in the wonderful Pacific Northwest. All right. Hey, Gabe, I enjoyed sharing that. I hope that you did, and I hope we have a few questions.
I always enjoy hearing your updates from Europe, Rick, and we have a lot of great questions to get to. Before we get started on those, though, do we have a quick word from our sponsor?
Well, if I was going to promote anything, I've just enjoyed so much sharing these tales, and there's a lot more, and I get to write about them on my Facebook page. We have well over 1 million people on our Facebook page, and we post almost every day. And I'm not always in my proper time zone, okay? I got to admit, right now, if you just thought my whole world was the Facebook page, I would be finishing up a trip in Italy. Okay, so I was just a little more than a month ago, I was in Italy and had a great time there, and that's running now along with London. And then my big chore ahead of me in the next few days is to get all the stories and the videos lined up so people can get an inside story on what I experienced on my last trip. And it'll be a lot of videos that you didn't see tonight, and they'll be on Rick Steves at Facebook. So my word from the sponsor is, if you'd like to get a daily dose of this kind of travel, follow me. It's Rick Steves at Facebook. Thanks.
All right. So before we dive into these questions, I will just point out you have had a wonderful amount of information for us tonight. A reminder to everybody, if you need to get to bed, we will be posting this recording by Thursday at the latest on the Monday Night Travel webpage and on the Rick Steves Travel Talks YouTube channel, so you can catch up on the Q&A later. I don't want to skimp on these questions, though, because we have a lot of good ones.
Thank you. And I'm sorry I talked probably 20 minutes too long, but that's what I get when I'm over there having a good time, and then I get this bully pulpit, so I can send you all my joy.
All right. Well, first, Rick, I have a question from Barbara. And Barbara was noticing that you talked a lot about, growing crowds in Europe. Over tourism these past few summers has been a big topic. And some Europeans are kind of becoming a little bit hostile towards tourists. So how can travelers avoid that and be the kind of tourists that locals want and avoid crowds themselves?
Well, you hear about Venice, for instance, Gabe, and in Venice, they're going to charge people to come in. I don't know if they're doing it yet, but it's a reasonable thing. Venice is a little community of 60,000 people with more than that tourists coming in every day. And the tourists that they don't like are the tourists that come in for the day and don't spend any money. They don't buy dinner and they don't stay in a hotel. They just buy a postcard, they leave a lot of garbage, they congest the streets, and they make a lot of noise, and they're out of there. So they're saying, well, if they're just going to come here and gawk, we need to charge them $5 to get in. I think that's very reasonable. Our tour groups are welcome because we spend the night. We don't spend the night on shore and side trip in. As a matter of principle, we stay right in the center of things, and we spend the night in the center of town. We do that not just because we care about the economy of the local community, that's an added bonus, but we just like to be where the action is after dinner and early in the morning before the crowds hit. So if you want to be a good traveler, you spend the night and you stay in a hotel. You don't stay in a B&B, Airbnb, you'd stay in a hotel if you really wanted to be thoughtful. That would be a major thing. And also, I was just thinking about it. Everywhere I just showed you in Germany, Berlin was crowded and Rothenburg was crowded. But they're not even anywhere near as crowded as the places that are suffering in the crowds. Venice, Amsterdam, Florence, Rome, Barcelona, these kind of places are mobbed. And that's where it's reasonable that people get out of bed in the morning and their city has been taken over by tourists. And that they reach their wits' end after a while and they just start getting angry. But everywhere I went, tourists were part of the economy and appreciated. You can cure all your crowd concerns by where you choose to travel. And you've noticed I've changed my focus on my teaching that way. I'm not compromising where I go. I'm just going to places that are great, that have no crowds because they're not as trendy. But they're wonderful places to travel.
Rick, you mentioned again Airbnb, and both Julie and Jeff had some interesting questions. just kind of along the lines of for people that do kind of like that feeling of having their own little home away from home in a city and kind of like that short-term rental feel, are there ethical ways to get that? Or should people just acknowledge that that's maybe not the most ethical way to travel and stay at a hotel?
Well, you can acknowledge that that's not the most ethical way to travel and still do it. It doesn't mean you're going to go to hell, you know. It just means you're not getting an A in sensitivity to local concerns. But we do a lot of things that are, to a certain degree, a negative. So you can minimize it. Ideally, you would stay in a place that is owner occupied and the people still live there. I think that's how Airbnb started. But now Airbnb has become part of this whole movement in our society where you have landlords and tenants, you know, and landlords are buying up all these apartments intending to have short-term rental, and it pushes out the regular people. People don't understand this. You're going to hear a lot in the political back and forth in our country in coming weeks, but you're never going to hear people well, I'll just say it. You're not going to hear Republicans talking about this tendency that our world is, the gap between rich and poor is becoming the wealthiest people, the billionaires. They got nothing else to do with their money but to buy property. What's Bill Gates doing right now? He's buying property. What are the big software companies doing right now? The biggest purchasers of land in Seattle, I understand from realtors around here, are, Google and Amazon and Gates. They're buying up all the property because they don't know what to do with their money. What do you do with property when you buy it up on spec? You rent it to people and you charge what the market will bear. So you have this gap going on. And I think it's a very corrosive thing for the health of our society not to have affordable housing. And what do we do about it? We recognize that government is a necessary referee in our economy in order to be healthy capitalists. I'm a capitalist, but I like a government to referee, so I don't abuse people that don't have the power I've got. And I just really lament the fact that our younger generations won't be the landowners that their grandparents were. They're going to be renting from powerful corporations and people who own a little bit of those corporations in their stocks. And that's the ethical issue that I see, if people want to get involved in that. But that's kind of subversive talk there when you get into that. But I see that's going to be a bigger and bigger deal, because I'm tired of hearing people say it's really expensive to get a house or it's really expensive to pay rent. Well, of course it is, because we've got people that drive the price up because they got endless money and they don't know what to do with it, but buy land and then rent it out to people for whatever the market will bear.
Well, thank you for those insights, Rick, on a very relevant topic. And speaking of people that love affordable housing, students, we have Monique, who is wondering, you popped by Coimbra and you, of course, have the memorable scene in your TV show of you spending time with some of the students there. Do you specifically recommend to people that they try to visit during the school year in Coimbra? Does it feel meaningfully different in the summer term when a lot of the students aren't there?
Yes. I wouldn't base a whole trip on it, but it's really a cool time when school's in. If you go to Coimbra when school's out, it's a sort of a dead city. If you go to Coimbra when school's in, it's happening. And then what I really like to do is hang out where the students hang out. I love an Italian university town during season when school's in, because the early evening, there's different piazzas that are filled with locals, students, and they're all having their spritz. And it's a great scene. And you can go in there and for $10, you can buy 3 kids a spritz. And then you're the most popular kid on the block and they want to talk to you. And you're just their window on America. And it's so much fun. But you've got to take the initiative. You've got to buy some students a drink, and you got to go to the square where the students hang out. And you can do it. I do it all the time.
Another kind of travel nuts and bolts question comes from Shirley. You talked about taking the trains, about your new digital Eurail pass, and whether you're doing point-to-point tickets or a pass. If you are traveling in Europe, especially in the summer, do you need to be planning well in advance, or can you just get your tickets as you go?
You just go. I didn't have any reservations. I mean, I had reservations because I had in Portugal because they required it. And I had one reservation in Germany because I just wanted to have a reservation. It was a longer trip and I wanted to get the reservation. But there's always empty seats on the trains. I can't promise that, but the worst thing is you can't get on that train and you go an hour later. But there's too many people burdening themselves because they're nervous about, can I get in? And there's no right or wrong answer, I guess, because sometimes it's better safe than sorry. But I'll tell you, I was just in Europe for 28 days and I had my hotels all figured out in advance. I had a few flights figured out in advance. Everything else was on the fly. No, I had my guides reserved in advance, but everything else was on the fly and it was great.
We have a question from Grant on the Germany side of things. He's curious, how does Germany discuss its World War I and II history? And especially during your career, how have you seen perhaps Germany change the way or evolve in the way that it discusses its World War histories?
Yeah, that's a very interesting and insightful observation. When I first started traveling and teaching, Germans never wanted to talk about Hitler. And that's because Grandpa was still alive and he was a bad guy. And you didn't want to talk candidly about how evil your government was. Now, Grandpa and Uncle are gone, and you can talk about what they did a little more comfortably. And Germany has learned, we've got to learn from history. Germany funds documentation centers that teach the lessons of what happens when you let a fascist government take over. Hitler was elected. He was elected fair and square. He just wanted to be dictator for a day. That's all he wanted, And he locked up retribution. He locked up the people who opposed him. He took over the judiciary. He eroded people's respect in institutions. He built up the fears of the bad guys, the rapists and the criminals, the drug dealers, or in his case, it was mostly Jews. And he was able to tell truths. He was able to tell lies so boldly that people couldn't figure out what was truthful and what was not truthful. He demoralized respect for the media. So he didn't have journalism to call anybody's bluff. And he did a remarkable thing. And he did it with the support of big corporations. It's a scary thing. It's kind of a downer to talk about it. But you can learn a lot from that. Germany has learned a lot from it, and they know because they paid a huge price. They paid a devastating price. For generations, or for decades, school teachers would run out of time by the time they got to 1930. And they wouldn't be able to teach the Nazi thing. It was too awkward. Now they've restructured the curriculum so you start the year with Hitler. Everybody learns about the Nazis. Everybody goes to a concentration camp. When you go to these great museums I was talking about, you see students there with their teachers learning from history. And when we travel, I think we have a moral obligation to take this opportunity to learn vividly from history and do it. You can still have fun, but man, oh man, I go to Europe to learn from history, and I dig it. It gives me so much meaning. It makes me feel like I'm part of the truth. It gives me dimension. I learn more about our home by leaving it and looking at it from a distance than I do by staying home and watching TV. I wish everybody had to travel before they voted. And then vote the way you want to vote. But get out there and see the world. Talk to people who have a lesson to share. Germany has that lesson. And now you will learn more about the whole Nazi nightmare than you would have ever learned a couple of decades ago. It's fascinating. These state-of-the-art museums, they call them docu-centers, are opening up. These secret police museums that tell how people were taken over by following a certain leader, like a cult hero, The mastery of propaganda. How do you lead a society astray? How do you derail a democracy? You go to the museums in Germany and you'll see. Or you watch my TV show about fascism in Europe. I did a 1-hour special on fascism, which has been a big hit all over the country on public television. You can watch it anytime you like at our website at ricksteves.com. Just go into the TV section, look in the specials. Check out that fascism show. It's a fascinating experience for me to write that script and then go over there and film it.
Yeah, Rick, we're currently doing a campaign on the Rick Steves Europe company social media channels around Europe's connection to the Olympics. And I spent a lot of my day-to-day working on a post about the 1936 Olympics under Hitler and just how he was able to wield them as a weapon of propaganda.
Oh, yeah.
So
he was really into rallies. Hitler did rallies like nobody had ever done rallies. And they didn't have the mass media, obviously, that we've got, but everybody was given a postcard and required to send that postcard to their friends to teach them how excited they were to go to that rally.
It's fascinating.
It's just fascinating how, I mean, it's an amazing thing to win the trust of a nation that's doing its best to see what's in its interest.
All right, Rick. Well, I'm glad that you talked about the ability to have fun and learn some of these difficult lessons from travel at the same time. It's not one or the other. And so in that spirit, I have one last question for you tonight. It seemed like you had a lot of fun on your recent trip, and a few people noticed you shared kind of your calendar, and on June 13th, it just said Hangover Day. And people were curious. Did you stay out a little bit too late drinking port wine?
No, that's a very insightful thing. It does say Hangover Day on June 13th, and that's because the night before is the big St. Anthony Festival, and everybody in Portugal will be hungover the next day. And my guide told me that's not a very good day to be out and about because things are closed and nothing's going on normal. It's Hangover Day. So I wrote down Hangover Day, and that was the better part of a day I spent in my hotel room putting everything into the computer, because it just made sense for me not to try to get something out of that day when nobody was able to talk. Well, my hangover day was when I got home.
Well, it just goes to show it's good to do your research and to know the local festivals and what's happening in the locations.
That's so funny. I wondered if people looked at all my scrawl on that page, if anybody would really have find anything. I mean, you can take a still shot of that and dig deeper. And if you got any question, just email us at gabe@ricksteves.com, right?
I don't know if I can actually read your writing, Rick, so that might not be the best solution, but I'll forward them to you.
All right. Well, I'm just so thankful for the month that I had, Gabe, and it's just so fun to be able to share this, and I'm just glad to have our friends all tune in. And respectfully, we can all just celebrate our travels and share what we learn and try to figure everything out. Okay? I guess that's it, Gabe. I just want to thank everybody for joining us and remind you we've got lots of travels each Monday because we are all enjoying the world together. Thanks again. Happy travels.